Hey everyone, George here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to another episode of the Win Insider Series. And today we've got Elaine Chukan Brown, who is a renowned wine writer, educator, speaker. And Elaine is here to talk about her new book, The Wines of California. Elaine, thank you for joining us today in our Insider Series.
I'm thrilled. Thank you. I enjoy the series. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm super curious about anyone who's like going to put the time in to write a book like you did. But I think I want to go back, and I'm always curious when I do these things. And for those of you in our audience, you've seen a bunch of these. Almost all the time I'm talking to people that I've actually have met and have a relationship with. And so this is the first time you and I are meeting. So I'm super curious and maybe even a little bit nosy. So pardon me in advance.
Nosy's okay.
Just to begin with, like I said, I'm curious about your journey. So you grew up in Bristol Bay, Alaska. So I want to hear a little bit about that and how you went from Bristol Bay way up there in Alaska to you're here in Sonoma County and doing what you do.
Yeah, so I grew up migrating, actually. My parents wanted us to be able to go to a mainstream school. So my two older sisters and I wintered in Anchorage with my folks. And then for a quarter or third of the year, we would be out on the western coast of Bristol Bay, which is the largest intact wild salmon run in the world. And it's also where my mom's site is from. And so we would go spend the summers there with my grandparents and cousins and great-grandparents and commercial fish for salmon. All 5 Pacific species go through that area. I'm really proud and happy that I grew up that way. There's just like fundamental tools that I got about, this sounds ridiculous, but I honestly started commercial fishing for salmon at the age of 9. And knowing how to do that has served me well in all kinds of things. And so then but from growing up in Alaska, I was very aware that there were lots of places in the world, and I really was curious and wanted to see them. So I sort of went off exploring, and in my 20s decided I would just kind of try anything I didn't know stuff about that was reasonable. Like I didn't do crazy dangerous things or anything like that, but I hand cleaned antique rugs for a while. I trained camels for a while. I did 2 days baking chocolate cakes for a bakery. I could name all kinds of other crazy things. But then at the end of around when I was turning 27 or so, I was like, well, what do I want to try next? And I realized what I needed to try was a long-term project. So I went back and finished my undergrad and went straight into doctoral work with philosophy and was an academic philosopher for a while, and then accidentally ended up in wine.
Would you say accidentally? What does that mean?
It was pretty accidental. So in grad school, I was in Montreal. So there's it's pretty good wine culture there. And a lot of it is very French wine.
Yeah.
And so, grad students would be asked to go out to dinners with visiting professors and things like that. And I realized every single meal, someone needed to be choosing the wine. And there'd be this whole thing about, oh, no, I don't know. No, get Eric to do it.
Yeah.
And so I started sitting across from Eric so I could listen to what he was looking for in the wine. And then just started kind of trying to read the wine list myself based on that and remember which places he said were good or producers or things. And then I just over time started really getting fixated on that idea of learning all these details. And it finally got to the point where I decided to see what I could actually make happen in wine.
So you didn't grow up with wine, wasn't part of your everyday growing up on the table kind of a situation, right? So it was all new to you.
Yeah, it was all new. I knew it was a thing. I was very focused on this idea that there's something called a classical education. And so, if you're going to be well-rounded, what are the different things you learn? And included in culture is wine, right? So I was aware of it, but I didn't grow up with it at all.
Were you, did you find yourself intimidated by it in the beginning? Because what most people do, I didn't grow up with wine on the table. So for me, it was, definitely a little intimidating when I wound up out here in wine country. Or was your curiosity, because you're obviously, you like school, right? You're a student. So did that part grab you more? You weren't intimidated by that? You just this is something new to learn about?
Yeah, mostly I mostly approach things with curiosity. I really don't want to go back to take more university courses. I went all the way through. I'm good. It's fine. But I am really curious, and I really prioritize and prize learning continuous learning on my own as well. And so, yeah, I mean, this might sound strange, but I don't think it occurred to me to be intimidated about wine. And it's because for me, there was nothing at stake except understanding.
Yeah.
I just wanted to understand it. And so it just, I mean, it looked like this massive thing, but I could just wander around and find out as I went, you know.
Yeah. It's because you know what, I wish more people were like that, because I think that's one of the things that we as an industry have to figure out how to overcome, right? Those people are just intimidated to the point where they would just have a cocktail or a beer or something else that they can wrap their head around a little bit easier. And honestly, it's like I think a lot of that is what the role that our journalists play in our industry is, helping to make wine a little more approachable, a little more accessible, a little less intimidating. And did you like? Oh, so I want to talk about here how you got into writing about wine, but was part of when you wrote about wine, were you writing for people? Did you have like a certain kind of consumer in mind when you were doing your writing? Like, I'm writing for people who don't know much about wine, or I'm writing for people like that know a lot about wine?
It just depended on where I was writing. So initially, I got started when blogs still were a
Yeah.
thing. And I really thought of that as if I was writing as a means to my own understanding. But I also was, it's like in my head, I was in conversation with my friends that I would go to the wine bar with. I was so curious that they would frequently tell me that they wished I was always there when they drank a bottle of wine because it made more sense when I was there.
Yeah.
And so I thought of it as if I was writing or talking with them. But then as it went on and I started writing for different magazines, um, I started being aware of trying to think of who your audience is, and oh, this is a more vineyard focused magazine. So, but again, they're just wine lovers. They
Yeah.
don't work in vineyards, trying to, how do I strike that balance? And then if it's, writing about wine in a magazine that has nothing to do with wine, so for me, the idea is that it's wine's complexity that makes people fall in love with it. But we
Yeah.
have a history of trying to simplify wine, which
Mhm.
tends to mean erasing all of the fascinating details. So why would anyone care? But
Yeah.
I really believe that you can retain that intelligent romance, the complexity of wine, by writing clearly. And you just adjust how much of whatever you include based on who the expected audience is.
Did you was it easier for you to pick up the nuances in different wines and go, oh, that's a blackberry, or that's a ripe, like some of the descriptors? Is that something that was easy for you, or did you
Well,
have to work at that?
no, I definitely had to learn how people tended to describe wine, but in
Yeah.
terms of being pulled in and noticing differences, that what did feel really natural to me. Part of why I got so intrigued by wine was because in a good glass of wine, there's so much aroma. And growing up in Alaska, there's so much aroma just on the landscape. So I was
Yeah.
very used to going around smelling things.
Yeah.
And when I left Alaska, it seemed like almost nowhere else was like that. But then a glass of wine was like that. And that
Yeah.
was really exciting to me. So I didn't, at the time, I didn't necessarily think in terms of like blackberry, blueberry, things like that.
Yeah.
But I would be fascinated by the detail of what I was smelling, and I would
Yeah.
start kind of talking about it, and eventually built my understanding of how to describe things as well.
That's good. I still am not that great at like the descriptor parts of, the descript some of the descriptors, and I've been around it for a long time. For me, like I kind of had an aha moment early on. I was working for the Terlato family, Tony Terlato, and Tony was very big on food and wine, right? So we always had these incredible dinners and chefs and everything. And for me, that was my aha moment when I started to be around wine and food that was paired specifically for each other. Is when I started going,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
okay, now I'm really, this is starting to click for me now. And still, like, for me, that's my thing, of just getting the right wine with the right food. That's fun.
It's so much fun. Yeah.
Now tell me about how did you start? When did you start writing about wine?
Well, so I had done a lot of work learning writing, kind of growing up in university and things like that. But then
Yeah.
when I first started getting curious about wine, like I was describing earlier, I understood that I needed to accumulate information. And so I would talk to people that worked in wine. Like a friend of mine was the manager of a wine shop, wine bar. So I'd ask him to tell me about what I was drinking and things like
Yeah.
that. But I became curious enough that I started trying to read about it. And I had been in this academic context. And so the idea that you do all this research and then you kind of summarize and put it out there, like that's just a natural part of learning from
Yeah.
that perspective. So that's actually why I started a blog. I just needed a way to synthesize what I'd learned about that wine I just had and put it somewhere. So I started a blog and didn't promote it or anything. I just started writing up what I was kind of learning as I went.
You just need an
And
outlet for your like
it was,
what was
yeah.
inside of you.
Yeah, because there's this idea in academia too, if you're there's some point where to go on to the next step, you have to write it up and give it it's like you give it away
Right.
and find out if you did it well or not.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a wine mentor or anything. There was no way to do that. And so I just was like, oh, well, if I put it on this blog, it's like I don't entirely control where it is. It's not just my journal.
Right.
So it feels more real, like something's at stake. So I have to put it together. And I didn't promote my blog or anything, but it somehow, a couple of wine people they found it and started following. And then like things kind of grew from there, which is again, why I say it was very accidental.
Yeah. Was that at that point with like were people starting to send you wines to try and review, or people were pitching you on stories about themselves and their brands? Like what were you like? How did I'm curious about how that evolved.
Yeah, so with the blog, I was just initially I was just kind of including wines that I was tasting myself, but then
Yeah.
initially a few months after I started it, it got recommended in the New York Times, and then someone in China asked if they could reshare something, and it just kind of kept expanding. And then I got asked to go on a wine writer's trip to Friuli, Italy,
Okay.
which I found shocking. But I decided to go ahead and go. And while I was there, I like just wrote up every visit. So I was actually posting on a blog like 3 times a day. And that like really expanded my readership. And then when I got back, people started asking if they could send me wines. And then people said, oh, you should come visit. You're in Arizona. You could drive. I was in Flagstaff, Arizona at the time. You could drive
Okay.
over to Santa Barbara County or whatever. So I decided, why not? I'll just go do that. And so then my blog writing became writing up what people sent me and writing up actually visiting in person and things like that.
Yeah.
And then after about a year of that, Wine and Spirits magazine was about to release an issue. This is back when they still did 10 or 12 issues a year. And there had been an event in Sonoma County that they realized was really important to write up, but none of their writers had been there. They didn't know about it till after it had happened. So they started asking around, well, were any writers there? And somebody was like, well, this Elaine person who's got a blog was there. And so they reached out and asked.
Yeah.
They looked at my blog, decided the writing was at least competent, and then sent me an email and asked if I would write up this event since I'd been there. And they used my photos too. And that sort of got me started writing magazines.
What was the event? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was the 7% solution.
I don't
So it's
remember
like
that.
2013, and the idea was that most vineyards in California grow it's like 90, the idea at the time was 93% of the vineyard planted in California with wine grapes had only like something like 7 or 8 varieties, kind of the obvious big guys, Cabernet,
Right.
Chardonnay, Pinot, and this remaining 7% was everything else. And so it was this event where the people that only poured other varieties.
It's
So it's
more
called the 7%
oh,
solution.
that's interesting. I don't, I'd say I didn't, that one, I must have missed that one for some reason, but that was probably pretty interesting. You probably tasted some interesting wines, I'm sure. Do you enjoy writing about, I'm going to segue into the book here for a second, stories about the people behind the wines or the wines?
Well, both. In my mind, the wine, yeah, again, I didn't come into this with a traditional wine education.
Right.
So there wasn't a set of rules I was supposed to adopt. I just had to figure out, well, what makes sense to me to learn about wine? I want to understand how wine works. And once I realized people were willing to talk with me and taste with me, that in my mind, well, to learn how wine works, you go to the people that it comes from.
Yeah.
And so, I was lucky enough to get to really do my wine education walking in vineyards, or like going and learning how to prune and then going back and, you know, doing leaf pulling, or, the whole range of
Yeah,
things for
yeah,
a season. And then also tasting, and some winemakers just sort of, they enjoyed tasting with me for whatever reason. And so is like every 6 months we'd go back and like move the vintage forward, so to speak. And
yeah,
there was one winemaker in particular, we would go through and we taste every barrel from the recent vintage.
yeah,
And then we would talk through how, yeah, this one will go with that cuvee and da 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 da. And
yeah,
then we would go out and taste the bottles from the newly released vintage of the same wines.
yeah,
And then I'd go back 6 months later, and we would do it again, but it's like see how the barrels had progressed in 6 months, and then eventually those would be in bottle. It was really pretty profound, and it really set a basis for, I really taste with this perspective of, I'm not just tasting the wine right this second in the glass, I'm like tasting
yeah,
with this imagined trajectory of backwards and forwards.
yeah. You must be pretty good. To me, that's so. During my career, I had the opportunity to do a lot of those sort of things when I was primarily on the winery side of things, and I still never got really good at kind of going, tasting wines that were young, early in the barrel, and getting a good sense for what they were going to be like, down the road. But it was fun to taste with the people that could do that, and kind of have them help you sort of get a sense of that, and then sitting in with as they're putting those blends together, which is always kind of a fun
Mhm.
exercise when people
Yeah.
don't get to do it. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Um, I like, for me, it's like I feel like there's just so many fascinating people in the wine industry. The wine industry is full of like dream chasers, I call them, because like it doesn't make a lot of sense on financially to do
Yeah.
some of what these folks do, but they have these dreams, and a lot of times, or they've been successful in other industries, and they just have the ultimate confidence, and they're just going to go do something that they love. I, it's one of the things I love about this industry is that there's just so many different types of people, and there's no really one right or wrong way to find success. You've got to make a good product, obviously, and you've got to, I always say, you've got to price it reasonably. It's got to be within sort of parameters of what people will pay for that particular type of wine, and where it's from. But mainly, you just got to be out there working really hard all the time, and that's the part of our industry that people just the general consumer has no idea how difficult it is to be successful, to be
It's
sustainable.
Yeah, it's well, and the sustainable, how do you keep going is I think the really hard part, because I've gotten to wherever it is I am in the wine industry because for, 8 years I just did it nonstop.
Yeah,
And just, anytime I had the chance to go to a region, I would go do full immersion, 12 hours a day minimum the whole time I was there. And then come back home, and I would, especially when I first got started, like let's say I'd get a collection of Pinots or something, so I'd get as many different Pinots from one part of the world as possible, and then I'd taste them all twice a day over the course of 5 days.
okay,
And if you have 30, if you have 30 Pinots and you open them, straight up, open them and taste them, and then you wait and do it again that evening and the morning. It was a lot of work, but it was also so educational for me, because what I learned is that it gives you an insight into how well the wine will age,
yeah,
how it holds together after opening.
yeah,
Um, and it just gave me, because I think a lot of things, like you were talking about, oh, can you name fruits and things? But I think that's like so far down the track, so to speak, in our
yeah.
relationship with wine, and that before that there's this sort of innate understanding. And so for me, like doing these tastings of the same wine over and over, I absorbed some kind of understanding that's hard to explain, but that I can use to notice things about other wines I taste.
When you're doing that, are you coming at it like, are you like ranking these wines? Are you just writing little descriptors, little like your own little shorthand of like what you like about it, what you don't like about it? Like what's your process? Are you looking at, as you're going back, are you revisiting like the color, the nose, the taste, the finish? I mean, talk about your evaluation process. I'm curious about that.
Well, it's sort of a problem, because my first response when I'm first tasting the wine it's like I'm overwhelmed by it. Like it's almost like I'm inside the wine,
Yeah.
and I have this like really intense internal experience, where it's almost like I'm not just tasting and smelling it, but it's like I can see its shapes, like how the structure's built and things like that. And so I have to sort of let that happen, and then it's as if I can step back and look at the wine and then describe it.
Wow.
So it's almost like three steps. I have to like let this overwhelm happen, calm down enough to step back and look, and then figure out how to translate what I see into things that make sense for other people.
That's a trip, man. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so the ranking it or scoring it doesn't, that's like very far down the
Yeah.
process for me.
Yeah. And you're usually by yourself and you're like, is this like typically doing this alone?
Yeah, if I'm reviewing, then I'm probably by myself. Yeah. If I'm ta like tasting bottles and
Just
reviewing.
focused.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Wow, man. That's wild. I'm involved with a couple wine competitions and I don't judge. I'm kind of more like the helping to promote and pay the bills and things of that nature. But I'm always sort of fascinated with the wine judging. It's a little different than what you're doing, right? Because they're having to whip through 100
Yeah,
wines in a
yeah.
day, you know what I mean? And then rank them
Yeah.
and score them and all that. But I am always curious about how different people do with their evaluation process and how they do it because everyone's a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I can go through the steps like you're saying, like
Yeah,
what's the color in the glass? How's the rim?
yeah,
What
yeah,
three fruits do you smell? Are there also forest notes? You know, I can do all of that, but that comes down, it comes later. And for me, that's, everybody has a different process, but for me, I still want to be able to just drink wine. And so
yeah,
it's like I can short circuit things before it gets to that kind of assessment if I'm
yeah,
just hanging out. So that works because I don't want to be critiquing wine anytime I come in contact with it.
yeah. Did you ever do you do wine judging? Do you do wine
Yeah, yeah,
competitions?
yeah. I actually, there's different ways of doing it. And I really, in the States, it's more likely that you'll have, like four people round table and you
Yeah,
get eight wine flights or something like that. And I mean, the kind of atmosphere or attitude is different in different judging competitions, but I really like that sort of sit down, talk about it possibility. Yeah, like you said, yeah, you do go through the flight,
yeah,
and with your notes, relatively quickly, but then if there's some sort of, you think there's too much oak, and I'm like, no, this is Rioja,
yeah.
let's talk about why we each see that. And I really like that process. In New Zealand and Australia, they have this very rigorous process where you stand with a tall top table that is gridded to like 200 squares.
Okay.
And so you could have a flight of like 76 Sauvignon Blancs from Marlborough, and you just taste through them, and you keep all the judges taste until they've gotten through all 76 and ranked them.
Wow.
That is really intense, hard work, and I really am fascinated by seeing that process because there are people that are so good at it. But the truth is like I do go do that to get kind of insight into a region. Because
Yeah,
sometimes people will want an international judge or something like that. And because it's only one of me, it's not like everything is at stake with my view. Because I know in that context, like people there are trained to taste that way. They do it over and over and over again. Of course, they're
yeah,
better tasters than me. But I learn a lot from listen being like, oh, they said that's a gold. What is that, and then it just sort of
yeah.
adjusts my view too.
That seems I couldn't even imagine like trying. I mean, because even in the like the more panel structure that you refer to, right? So there's say three judges and you're going through your flights of 12 or whatever. Even that's like to me that over one flight after another is overwhelming. But to be at like a situation like you just described, I couldn't even imagine like going through 50 or 60 or 70 wines and ranking them. How much time do you have to do that? Like, do they, you have,
I can't remember. It's a pretty good amount of time though, and I really think that it's like if you're interested in doing this kind of thing, you develop your tasting endurance to it.
yeah,
So when I was doing, that kind of stand-up judging like they do in New Zealand and Australia, I haven't done it as much now because of the pandemic. And so I was back wine judging in New Zealand last year. I was like, oh my God, I am so bad at this. But I had been doing it a few times a year several years ago.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
was like, I'd gotten my endurance up to like 40, you know,
That's
that's
not,
still not 76. So I still was going to struggle
that's
when,
nuts.
but I think you just develop your ability. And like I said, in that part of the world, the winemakers, they're trained to taste that way. They develop incredible ability.
And they're standing.
Yeah.
They're literally standing.
Standing the whole time. Yeah.
That's like no joke. Like,
Yeah,
okay.
I know. And you're wearing a white coat and like all the stuff.
Oh my God. Oh, all right. That's crazy. I want to talk more about that, but we don't have enough time. So, all right, Wines of California. Tell me, like, why now? What made you do it? I mean, that's a
Exactly.
big project.
No, thanks. Well, I actually was asked to do it by the publisher, um, and I was like, well, let me think about it. And this is actually, we originally started talking about it before the pandemic, and then, everything got so strange that it got slowed down. But initially, like my thought process was very much like California is the most searchable wine region in the world.
Right.
Why would we need a book about it? And I wasn't saying that we don't. I was saying you have to have a good reason to write it.
Yeah.
And so I decided, okay, well, one obvious reason is that you can gather the necessary information in one place. And I was like, that's like, in a sense, that's what a book is, but that's also not a reason to do that.
Yeah.
And so I decided, well, the only reason to write a book on California wine would be to write what you can't find on the internet. So it would fulfill both those purposes. You'd have everything you need to understand California wine, but also from this perspective, you can't just search on the internet.
Yeah.
And so once I came to that, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I've spent all this time, like we were talking about before, one-on-one with people for years. And so I can really use that. And I give a lot of talks and seminars. And so I have a lot of practice kind of presenting information about wine and hearing what people respond to. And because of that, I was really able to develop pretty clear views of what's been happening in California wine for
Yeah.
years, just because I've been having that interactive discussion with people that are coming here to find out more. So that actually really informed my perspective on the book quite a lot, just that practice of talking about it with people through seminars. And so I decided that if I was going to write the book, it had to be the book I would write, not to focus on myself, but in the sense that like we each have a unique collection of experiences and skills. What is our unique perspective on it? So I ended up putting together 3 sections. I said, okay, well, what's a complete view? Well, it's how we got here, where we grow, what we're facing. And
Mhm.
so the first section deals with the history of California wine, but that's actually been written a lot, already. There's brilliant writing on the history of California wine. So I decided instead of writing it again, I would take the key moments of its development and write about what was happening in the country and world that made it understandable why it happened in wine. So there's actually, there's a chapter on prohibition and the incredible surprise impact of World War II
Yeah.
on wine. There's a whole chapter actually on the unexpected impact of Vietnam on California
Yeah.
wine, which I think tends to be the one people are most surprised by.
Yeah.
But and then a look at how the farm to table movement grew, which brought in this notion of organics and what the source of our food, and that fed into wine perspective as well. So the history section gets into a lot of things like that and looks all the way up to 2025. And then the middle section is like, where we grow. So each chapter focuses on a different major region. So there's North Coast, Central
Yeah.
Coast, et cetera. And I tried to really, again, make sure you have all the things you're supposed to know, elevations, major varieties,
Yeah.
acreage, but also some of the historical background for each place that isn't talked about as much.
Yeah,
And
I thought it was very cool. I mean, I didn't get to read the whole thing, but you're such a great storyteller. That was
oh,
like,
thank you.
it wasn't, like since I go, oh, these books are going to be boring. I'm just going to be reading about just the, elevations and varietals, but there were some good stories in there.
No, cool. Thank you. And it seems like a small thing, but I'm really proud of the photos that I used. They're only in the
Yeah.
where we grow section, but they're mostly photos I took or our friend that was traveling with me took, while we're sitting there actually with the person. And so I wanted the photos to be very human,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of them I would just really love. Like I can just see this joyful time we had together.
Yeah.
And then the last section, what we're facing, it looks, starts with asking what is the cultural significance of wine. Because in my mind, it's like the only reason to care how it goes now is because there's some reason to. So what's its significance? And then it looks at challenges and changes in the market, and then challenges and changing from climate.
Yeah, no, that's it's I like the way you broke it down, and like I said, it was what I have had a chance to read was really interesting. Like just even talking about like the Native American contributions and some of the stories about the early Chinese people that played a role in helping build these wineries. Like I didn't know anything about that. Were there some stories that you learned as you were putting the book together? Like I had no idea about that.
Well, there was a lot of I had pieces of a lot of things, and then I
Yeah,
would decide, oh, okay, well, I want to make sure I understand that, so I go read up more about it. But it was like, you and I are both up here in Sonoma County, and
yeah,
Napa Valley is right next door, and a lot of people, Napa is so known, like the whole world knows about Napa Valley.
yeah,
But Sonoma County was the first wine region in California, fine wine region in California,
yeah,
which a lot of people don't realize. And but then, like you just mentioned, Chinese immigrants, as soon as the Transcontinental Railroad finished, they actually came into California and helped build like really basic like road structures, building structures,
yeah,
caves,
yeah,
tunnels, like that all are we're still using today. And
yeah,
it's pretty amazing. And I knew that kind of thing was true, but then when
yeah.
I started reading about it more, it was like we're so deeply still dependent on this infrastructure that was built by Chinese people here in the States. It's pretty amazing.
No, I just I wish I could time travel back and just see what it was like back then. It's been so cool. I worked for Corbell for a bunch of years early on in my career, and you know, uh, and I worked for Jim Beam when Buena Vista was part of the Beam Wine Estates, and being in like those older, established properties and the old buildings, and seeing at Corbell they weren't using them anymore, but the giant redwood tanks. Like I just think it's so cool
It
to be
is
able to
really
think
cool.
about that.
Yeah.
In the press release, talks about the misconceptions about California wine, and tell me a little bit more about that. Like what misconceptions were you hoping to dispel?
Well, so again, the work that I do outside of writing this book is very much like I'm traveling literally all around the world, giving, talking about wine, giving seminars, not just about California, but but people will find out, oh, I'm in Sonoma, and so then they'll start talking about California. And for me, it's been really fascinating to taste with wine lovers or wine professionals in different countries, and if I'm in a place for a first time, like a couple years ago, I went to Vietnam for the first time. And I was like, man, I really want to know how these people think about wine. And so I designed that seminar so that, we had like 8 wines, and I had like what I would talk about with each wine, but I got them to talk to me about the wines before I told them anything about them, because
Uh-huh.
I really wanted to hear how they think and taste about wine. And I learned an incredible amount from doing that. And I've done that, I always joke I've taught a wine seminar in every continent except Antarctica, but I'm working on that one.
There you go.
Um, but because of that international perspective, I think I can't help but be here in the States when I write it, but I'm also like aware of these conversations I've had elsewhere while I wrote it. And there's like some of the obvious stuff is still believed, like that California just makes big wine. A lot of places still believe the Chardonnay is what they imagined it was in the 80s, even if maybe it wasn't actually even that then.
Yeah.
uh, and then homogeneity. A lot of people, it's interesting too, because in parts of the world, they really don't know anything except Napa,
Yeah.
people often fail to recognize how huge California is, and that plays into how incredibly varied it is. And so there's like 130 wine grapes growing here commercially.
Yeah.
That's a huge amount. And
Yeah.
it's not ridiculous that they succeed. It's like the, the topography of California and its growing conditions is that expansive, but also the people here are kind of wily and determined.
Yeah.
And so I really made a point of that too. It's like, I say this in the introduction of the book, this kind of innovative, uh, kind of gold rush seeking mentality that founded the state is as much a growing condition of California wine as the weather.
Yeah.
Because we have so many varieties and we're in so many parts of the state and growing such good wine because people are just like driven.
Yeah.
They just want to try it.
Yeah. No, that falls, like I said, they're these dream chasers. That's what they're out there
Yeah,
just
yeah, exactly.
doing their thing and trying to find their way and stand out in an ocean, of other producers that are also doing a great job.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's I would say over it's just it's not easy. Um, I just talked about this, that I found like the parts that I was able to get to and read just so it was really enjoyable. Like I was reading a story, but there is some technical components to it as well. Like, did you have like a conscious thought of like, all right, I'm going to try to balance out the storytelling with the technical piece? Like, how did you approach that?
Yeah, so again, with the having done seminars for a long time, I had kind of developed from there this process of like, okay, I'm going to tell you all the wine stuff that you're supposed to know,
Yeah,
but I'll pull you into caring about that by telling you these stories that are surprising or like talking about the wine in a way that's surprising. So it's like pull you in, give you what you're supposed to have, and then move
yeah,
back. And so never dwell on one too long.
yeah,
Because if you're only telling romance or only telling stories about wine begins to feel frivolous and like a luxury. I just took a break by listening to this, which is really important. But what I'm saying is that's not all of the substance of wine. So the other side is the history, how it got here, and
yeah,
why it persists, and for me, I think the thing is a lot of people when they talk about wine, it it gets treated as if it's always the way it is now is how it's always been.
yeah,
But and I wrote the book this way, like California wine is a history of problem solving and innovation.
yeah,
That is what history is. Like history of any sort is people facing a challenge, coming together, finding a solution, pushing to keep working on it. And then boom, something goes really well and it shifts things again.
yeah,
California wine has had a history of insuperable problems. Like everybody's kind of nervous about wine right now, right? But
yeah,
one of the things I realized as I was finishing the book, and this is in the epilogue, is that the whole history of the state, but also wine in the state, is a history of like, Anaheim illness hit Southern California's wine industry. In the 1800s, it was the epicenter of California wine. Out of nowhere, this phantom starts decimating vineyards. They don't know what it is. They call it Anaheim illness. So the whole wine industry moves up to Sonoma. That's how Sonoma becomes the first fine wine region in California. In the meantime, the people down south, they're like, we don't know what's causing this.
right,
It's too risky to plant again. So they move to citrus. California today is one of the world's great citrus centers. Like,
yeah,
isn't that interesting? I find that really interesting. It's because something went wrong with one thing
yeah,
that they tried another thing, and now citrus is enormous. So similarly up here, we so Pierce's disease, it turns out Anaheim illness is Pierce's disease. People
right,
come north, and then it turns out we've accidentally brought phylloxera.
right,
But we also help solve that, right? And
yeah,
then rebuild the industry. Unfortunately, very quickly after Prohibition comes. But the thing is, Prohibition ends in 1933. In 1934, there's already multiple statewide wine groups trying to solve the problem.
right,
How do we regain quality? So the Wine Institute forms in 1934 to represent wineries across the state. In Napa Valley, there's a Napa Valley technical group with the
yeah.
Mondavi brothers and Chelichev, and they're all working together to just figure out how to make wine well. Um, so again, it's actually from another perspective, California wine is a history of champions coming together and just sticking to it.
I talk about that a lot too. It's like, and I don't know if how unique it is, the way our industry works together on the winery side. On the vendor side, not so much. They're very competitive, but on the winery side, I give these, our winery associations, whatever form that, whether they're, marketing the region as a destination or their technical groups or whatever, we just have a great history of working together and sharing information, sharing experience, knowledge to help propel the whole industry forward. And it's one of the things I just love about it. I was always very actively involved with the different winery associations. I remember one year I was on the board for Sonoma County Vintners. This is back when I was with Jim Beam when they had their wine division, and we had Clos de Bois, and I sat next to a gentleman who was the president of Kendall Jackson at the time, right? So we were competing for shelf space on the in the Chardonnay category, but we were super good friends and figuring out how to get more people to drink Sonoma County
Yeah.
wines or come visit
Yeah.
Sonoma County. And it's just, again, it's one of those things. I don't know if it's how unique it is, but it's one of the great things about our industry.
Well, I think the wine industry has a lot of that compared to other industries, but California, there really are parts of the world that it's just not as bred into the
Yeah.
place. And um that's why I say too, like especially now where people are really nervous about what's going to happen. But I think if we remember, we are got here because of a history of people coming together and like listening and problem solving together. Like the collaboration is as much a growing condition of California as these other things we've been talking about, you know, innovation in the weather. And the truth is that's not as true in other places.
Well, I would tell you, Elaine, it's like really refreshing for you to say that, right? Because so, with Wine Industry Network in particular, so we work very closely with the industry vendors, right? So everyone's suffering right now because and you've driven around after harvest this year and saw how many grapes did not get, were unpicked, and we know how much bulk wine is available, and it seems like this is the worst for a lot of people, and I've been around for a while, but even the guys that are older than me, they're like, I don't know, man, this is like the worst I've ever seen it. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of a big reset. But I love what you said. It's like the history of California wine, or there's a history of solving problems and innovating. And I think it's important to maybe figure out how to like remind people of that because I think right
Yeah.
now I mean, the whole world is uncertain, feels uncertain. So it's not just, wine, but for us who are part of the wine industry, kind of wondering like, well, what's next? What do we need to do next? Um, and I personally like, I struggle with this a lot. I feel like a lot of our issues with not doing a good job connecting with either younger consumers or the wine curious. It's like self-inflicted. I feel like we've, in a lot of ways, and I'm not unique. It's not my own. I'm not the only one thinking along this way. But just the other day, I was thinking like, we need to make wine fun again. It's like it doesn't need to be so stuffy. It doesn't need to be like we need to do things that make these young people want to come to events. I was
Yeah,
at
exactly.
some of the takes I've been to recently, and I don't do a lot of them, but I try to support the association when they have things going on. And I'm 59. It's like I feel like I'm the youngest guy in the room sometimes. I'm like, what is going on? Or I was at a meeting with a number of association executive directors, and we're all sitting around talking. Had a session was dedicated to talking about what else could we be doing differently about connecting with younger people, like people in their late 20s and 30s, and there was not one person within 15 years of that age group that we're trying to
Yeah.
figure it out. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you know what? Here's an idea. Why don't we start asking people who are in the age group, the demographic that we're trying to connect with,
Yeah.
to see
Yeah.
what they
Exactly.
think?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on all of this?
No, I think you're exactly right. And the thing, I mean, so I really do believe what I've said that California wine is a history of collaboration and problem solving. And at the same time, of course, within that, individuals' businesses close, or an individual vineyard is pulled. Like there's like a kind of regeneration, but also some things go away because they weren't working or the person just didn't, something went wrong, and so we are problem solving, but it doesn't mean every single part of wine is going to persist.
Yeah,
And I think that one of the things I really appreciate you saying that piece about it being self-inflicted, because I think the wine industry has more resources for innovation than it tends to recognize.
yeah,
And the most powerful resource is each other. Like you said, there's fascinating, incredible, really creative, successful people in wine. It
yeah,
doesn't make any sense to come into wine. You will not make more money, but so many people have made a success here anyway. That says a lot about the kind of intellectual, creative, management resources of the industry. And I think we have to remember that we always have each other.
yeah,
What can we do? But then the other thing is, I think, you know, something a lot of people don't realize or think about is that the rise of wine media
yeah,
got started in California. So we're used to thinking of wine media as a global thing. There were wine writers before, but they were writing about things they were selling.
Yeah.
At the end of the 70s, California wine was starting to grow and needed a way to reach a consumer base it didn't have.
Yeah.
And so it started courting communicators and trying to get in front of people through the television or through magazines or through the newspaper. That was not a thing
Yeah.
before. So California starts doing that at the end of the 70s. You know, by 89 or so, Parker finally cares about us. And it boom, we basically California wine created this phenomenon that's the world's wine media landscape. And we were so good at that I think sometimes we are like, well, why? I earned that. It should still work. But
Yeah.
media doesn't exist in the same way. And I think we have to kind of recognize that and accept we are not, nobody owes us our success,
Hmm.
right? The wine industry is not entitled to exist.
Yeah.
That means it's not someone else's fault that we're struggling, which
Yeah.
is really hard. It's like, so it's actually what can we do as a business, as an individual, as a company, as an industry? Like, what do we need to do? And like you're saying, talking to the people that we're interested in reaching should be step one. I also, though, I think some of us can remember we have kids in that age range, you know.
Yeah.
I very happily get along quite well with my kid and my nieces and nephew, and even get to hang out with them with their friends. And I learned just from that. I just
Yeah.
learned so much without asking them anything. I just like get to hang out and watch a show and hear how they talk about it or any of that. Just the more we can do that, the more we're going to understand.
I'm totally on board with that. I have two daughters, they're 22 and 25, and I'm lucky that our house was kind of the house that they would hang out because I like
Yeah,
that,
that's
right? They kind of
huge.
keep an eye on them. They don't live with us anymore. They live close, but not with us. And yeah, it's fun to be with young people. And I think that's without taking anything away from people who are older and have experience. They're right. That's important. But I also feel like one of the and I think what you're alluding to, one of the part of the solution is going to be getting those younger people to the table to hear what they have to say, and that sort of change of leadership, right? Because I think that's kind of where we're
Yeah,
at.
yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
That's going to be the key. I know for me, it's been interesting. I was telling somebody, I literally this morning, I ran into somebody who was getting coffee, and we are talking about what's going on. And for our business and for Wine Industry Network, most of our revenue comes from our industry vendors, right? So they take booths at our trade shows, or they sponsor, or they advertise online. And it was probably about 14 months ago that all of a sudden it was like what's going on? The guys that
Yeah.
would spend 10,000 were spending 5,000. The guys would spend 5,000 were spending
Yeah.
2,000. The guys, right? Because they wineries weren't making as much, and so it was trickling down. And I felt like I went through these like the stage of like at first I was like in denial, like okay, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a
Everyone's
weird
just
moment.
nervous. The elections are coming up. It's where things are going to be fine. Then it was like then it didn't get better. Then I was like depressed. Felt like this last half of last year, like depressed, like on, oh my God, it's been my whole career doing this. Like now what's going
Yeah.
to happen? Like this is like it's not about the pie is just smaller. It's just what I mean. And then it's like, and it's not been that long, but I probably in like the last month or so where it's like fully like accepted, embraced, like okay, this is different. Stop thinking about how we were doing things because those days are done. It's over. This is, and I hate to, no, I'm not a big fan of the term the new normal because I'm not even sure we've landed where we're
Yeah.
going to
Right.
land.
Right.
But just like, go, hey, that's gone. It's like you lost someone. Like they're not coming back. It's over. Now what? And
Yeah.
I think, like as an industry, I think that's kind of where we have to get our heads. It's like it's not going back anytime. It's never going
Well,
to be
it's
what it
just
was.
not. It's just not. And it's also that's really hard because it feels like, oh my God, why can't it just be like that anymore? But also what I have so much work to do and I don't even know what it is, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
But the it from another perspective, California wine just got lucky. We happened to have built enough of an industry in the late 70s and kind of first half of the 80s, which by the way, the sales were horrible through the 80s, right? Like
right,
people
right.
didn't know if the industry was going to last. And we had just enough wineries doing just okay enough that two things happen about the same time. You know, it's like the French Paradox gets announced on 60 Minutes,
Yeah.
and like I'm pretty sure it's 89, it might be 88. And again, around 89, 90, Parker says, and he must have been in 90, 91. He says, the 80s were the year for the decade of Bordeaux, but the 90s will be the decade of California. Anyone that fails to see California wine is on the world stage is not paying attention.
Yeah.
But we also, that happened. So there's first, by the way, neo-prohibitionism all through the 80s. Sales are plummeting. This sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it?
Yep.
And then these two kind of unexpected miracles that we could never have chosen to happen. Like someone else got to do those. Those happen at the same time we're in a building market.
Yeah.
People have lots of extra to spend.
Yeah.
Right. And so all of a sudden, California wine just explodes through the 90s. But it also exploded so fast that as soon as there was a pause, with Y2K and then with, yeah, I know. Who even remembered that happened, right? Because there's been so much since. But we get this like downturn in the early 2000s because of Y2K. And then just a few years later, there's the global financial crisis and a much bigger downturn. And then we have weather issues.
Yeah.
And I think there was this kind of denial. It was as if, no, the 90s are the norm. That's that big financial like growth. That's the norm.
Yeah.
But a lot of wineries and wine businesses expanded so fast because it was so much easier to succeed in comparison that they hadn't built a base that would last. And I just think that's always the question. It's like, what's the base that can last? What's the part I have to keep doing because I believe this? But also then when can we take the opportunity to expand? Like that's a big risk. Yeah. Expansion is a risk, you got to do it when it's going to work.
No, I think you're spot on. It's really fun talking to you. It's like, I feel like I'm talking like a historian. You're like a wine historian, and because it's cool to draw on some of these things that we've gone through. And I'm serious, Elaine. It's like, I feel like people need to hear more about the history, right? Because it just kind of makes you not so afraid.
Well, that's the thing. I really, I hope people will read more of the book than the epilogue, but that said, the epilogue of the book, I feel like once I got to that part, I realized this is what I was writing about all along, exactly this point that we pay attention to what we've learned before, what we've gone through before. Actually, the epilogue comes to this point. It's like, this is all this, look at what we've come through already. That was even worse in a lot of ways. And here we are, and we have, so how do we want to face that opportunity now? And that, said too quickly, that can sound trite, but my hope is that the book offers exactly what you're talking about, that like, let's be honest about where we came from and the way things are now, because that's the best way to know how to move forward.
Well, it's like, what's that saying? Like, history repeats itself, or history, what's it say? I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, history repeats itself, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. Tell people how they can get the book and how they can follow your writing.
So the book is Wines of California, and it is published by Academy Divan, which is a publishing house out of the UK. Okay. Stephen Spurrier played a part in helping to get it started. And but if you just search my name, Elaine Chukan Brown, and California wine, it'll come up. In terms of finding me online, I am on Instagram as Hawk_Waka Waka.
I know. I saw that.
WAKAWAKA.
I love that. That was cool.
But also, if you search my name, Elaine Chukan Brown, a ton of different kinds of writing and things come up. So,
well, thank you for joining us today, and everybody in the audience out there, go get the book. It's really great. And Elaine, this has been so fun. Keep doing this. This is fantastic. We need to hear more of it, and we'll hopefully get you on the show again. Maybe we'll come back next year. We can see what unfolded.
Where did we get? Yeah. No, really fun talking with you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks everybody for watching. And if you like this one, make sure you like our channel on our YouTube channel.